She doesn't belong in here, and neither do you, I said, my voice flat, surgical. The woman standing at my wife's bedside didn't flinch. She adjusted the IV line like she had a right to it. Her badge hung from a lavender lanyard. The name read, C. Mayburn, Certified Doula, Woodvine Wellness. It should have meant nothing, except I knew the name. Clarice Mayburn, president of the Woodvine Glen HOA board. I'm here as her legacy witness, she said calmly, like we were at a wedding, not in the middle of my wife's active labor. This child is part of the covenant now. I'm simply observing. I didn't move, I didn't yell, I just said one thing. I'm Chief of Obstetrics, and that badge doesn't exist in our database. Her eyes finally shifted. Just a flick. Not panic, just calculation. But she wasn't fast enough. My ID had already pinged the system. My access override was live. Subscribe right now if you believe no HOA president should ever set foot in a delivery room. The next 11 parts will take you inside a war no family should ever fight. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. A spiritual alignment at birth benefits the entire community. There's precedent, Clause 12, subsection 5. I took a breath. My name is Dr. Bram Edevane. I lost twin daughters 8 years ago because I trusted protocol instead of instinct. I've delivered over 3,000 babies since. But this one? This is my daughter. My wife's name is Vienna. Her birth plan doesn't include uninvited zealots quoting fake bylaws in a sterile zone. I stepped between her and the monitors. Her hand was still too close to Vienna's belly. My wife's face was pale, glistening. Her eyes fluttered with every contraction. She didn't know we weren't alone. Not yet. The medallion was gone. The sunleaf medallion, hand-carved walnut, strung with red cord, had hung from the room's privacy handle. Vienna made me promise to bring it. Said it reminded her of her grandmother's hands during storms. That medallion meant more than any sermon Clarice could preach. And now it was missing. You don't forget something like that. Not when your wife's spinal block just started wearing off, and someone not on staff is breathing sanctimony onto her neck. Clarice moved slightly toward the warmer tray. I reached behind me and thumbed the alert pad twice. Security. Clarice Mayburn, you're hereby ordered to vacate this medical facility immediately. You've bypassed sterile protocols, impersonated licensed personnel, and interfered with critical care. You're trespassing on hospital grounds. Still, no panic, just smugness. This child is bound to this land, Dr. Edevane, to this community, to our records. You may carry the title, but I carry the covenant. I almost laughed, but my fists were cold. The nurse finally walked in, Tansy, young, rattled, and gasped when she saw Clarice. You let her in? I asked. She had a lanyard, Tansy stammered. Said she was pre-approved. Birth registry. There is no such registry, I snapped. And there never was. Clarice turned to Tansy. You'll want to remember your tone, dear. This facility is built on HOA-zoned land. That's when Vienna stirred. A weak breath, then a wince, then a short cry, low and strained. The fetal monitor pinged behind us. Decelerations. My stomach hollowed. I turned, forcing my voice to steady. You have 30 seconds to step back. If my daughter's heart rate drops again, I'll deliver this child myself. But first, I'll make sure you never see a gated property again for the rest of your life. Clarice didn't move, but the door opened. 2 guards in blue stepped in, too slow, too calm, not knowing what she had already touched. But it was enough. They flanked her, hands on her arms. She resisted, not violently, but with words that will stick with me longer than any scream. This is why your first daughters died, Dr. Edevane. No humility, no alignment. They pulled her out just as the alarm hit 90 decibels and the fetal rhythm collapsed. I didn't think. I moved. Vienna's eyes opened, wide and confused. What's happening? I reached for the gloves. It's time. And just like that, the sacred line between family and invasion had been crossed by a woman who thought a housing covenant outranked love, loss, and life. The letter came 3 weeks before the due date. It was printed on thick parchment-colored stock, sealed with an embossed HOA crest that looked like it belonged to an empire, not a cul-de-sac. The wording was clinical at first, formal community compliance notification. But by the 3rd paragraph, it veered into something else entirely. We require a minimum 14-day notice before any birth-related events, it read. This includes hospital visits, midwife arrivals, or any form of ceremonial acknowledgement of life transition, per Woodvine Covenant Article 6, Section 12. Vienna thought it was a joke. I knew better. Clarice Mayburn, president of the Woodvine Glen HOA, didn't joke. She wrote with the tone of someone who believed she was protecting the neighborhood from divine wrath, and I'd already seen her twist bylaws before. This wasn't about parking or paint colors. It was about power. The day after the letter arrived, she was on our porch. "I'm just checking in," she said, hands clasped like a visiting missionary. "So much energy swirls around a birth. We like to keep those vibrations centered." My fingers tightened around the doorframe. "We're not having the baby here. It's a hospital delivery. You'll receive nothing." Her smile sharpened. "Hospital, home, life crosses boundaries. We simply ask to be informed." "Why?" "For documentation and harmony." I didn't respond. She stood there a moment longer, scanning past me toward Vienna, who was propped on the couch with a book and a warm compress. Her pregnancy had been harder than we'd hoped. Clotting disorder, bed rest. I'd already lost 2 daughters once. I wasn't risking it again, not for anyone, especially not her. Clarice leaned in just slightly, like she was about to whisper a blessing or a threat. "Some communities forget to honor new life. We don't." I closed the door. That should have been it. But within days, we noticed things. A man in HOA-issued beige slacks walking past our home twice a day with a clipboard, a low-resolution HOA cam installed on the maple tree across the street, angled conveniently toward our driveway. Notices slipped into our mailbox, warning that unreported changes in household status could affect property value assessments. It was all absurd, but precise. And then came the voicemail. "Hello, this is Clarice Mayburn. I'm calling to confirm if the birth is still expected within the 3rd week of May. If so, I'll file the proper community witness forms. This helps us schedule post-birth wellness visits and ensure the child's records align with subdivision lineage protocols." Subdivision lineage protocols. I played the message twice. Vienna cried the second time. She didn't want me to escalate. She said stress would only hurt the baby, that the HOA would back down if we ignored them. But Clarice wasn't backing down. She was building something, laying groundwork, shaping a paper trail that would look procedural, unless you knew what she was doing. A week later, I caught the first breach. I came home early from the hospital and found a folded notice rubber banded to our side gate. Unauthorized installation of wind chimes in birthing proximity zone. The note included a hand-drawn map with our nursery window circled. The chimes were my late mother's. I'd hung them outside Vienna's window for calm. They hadn't moved in days. That same night, the sunleaf medallion went missing from its hook by our door. I searched everywhere, inside, outside, under the porch. It wasn't just decoration. It was tradition. My grandmother carved it in 1968 for my mother's first pregnancy. It passed through every Edivane birth since. It was the only object we all agreed should follow us to the hospital. I filed a report with neighborhood security. The gatekeeper, Emery Kesslin, said he'd ask around. He looked uneasy. Clarice showed up again 2 days later, this time at dusk. I answered the door with my hospital ID still clipped to my chest. "I hear it's a girl," she said. I didn't answer. She smiled again, that tight expression that always meant she was 2 moves ahead. "You'll want to be compliant this time. Birth set tone. Families who withhold tend to invite discord." I shut the door before she could say anything else. Inside, Vienna rubbed her belly and looked toward the empty hook by the door. "She's not done, is she?" she asked. "No," I said. And for the first time, I believed it. Emery Kesslin didn't consider himself a coward, not really. He told himself he was just following protocol. When Clarice asked for the gate log report on House 214B, he generated it. When she said it was just for liability documentation, he let her skim the entries. When she requested a hard copy with timestamps of all in and out traffic for the past 60 days, he handed it over without asking why. After all, she was the president. He was just a part-time desk manager with a dental plan and a fragile mortgage. Still, that night, when he poured his coffee and stared at the footage of Clarice printing her own duplicate badge in the HOA's visitor credential system, he felt it. Shame. the kind that nestles under your skin like a tick, not loud but persistent. He didn't like her tone that morning either. She hadn't even knocked. She just let herself into the security trailer and started typing. Need these logs today, Emery. The family at 214B is being evasive. We can't risk misfiled events again. He knew who she meant. The doctor, Bram Edivane. He'd seen the man wave to his wife every time he drove out in his charcoal Acura. Not loud, not flashy, just tired and sharp-eyed, the way real professionals always looked. Emery had been in the hospital once when his sister gave birth. It was chaotic, sacred, quiet, and terrifying all at once. He couldn't imagine someone barging in with a clipboard during it. He remembered asking, just once, "Is this for a violation?" Clarice turned slowly, as if weighing whether he was even worth a full response. "It's for order." That was it. Now Emery sat in the back corner of the HOA trailer after hours, watching her replay the same 18-second loop of the Edivanes leaving for the hospital 2 nights ago. They left at 1:43 a.m. Clarice had known. She printed the access badge that same day. She even had the hospital's staff photo format, something her niece used when she interned there 2 years ago. The badge was clean, professional, just fake. He hadn't stopped her. He hadn't even warned the Edivanes, because at the time, he wasn't sure if she'd really go that far. Now, he knew. A system notification blinked in the corner of the screen. Unauthorized ID ping at Dominion Regional Medical Center, flagged access level mismatch. He clicked into it and saw it. Clarice Mayburn had signed into the delivery floor under a doula credential 37 minutes before hospital security removed her. She had actually entered. Emery leaned back, rubbing his temples. His head ached. He opened the side drawer and stared at the printed gate logs she'd left behind. Column after column of dates and times. Her notes were scribbled in the margins. 3rd trimester, disruption window, unreported arrival. There were names of other families too, other women, other deliveries. She'd been tracking them all. He didn't know what to do. If he spoke, she'd destroy him. He'd seen what happened to the last guy who crossed her, Jordan something, a maintenance lead, filed for bankruptcy 3 months after she found out he'd voted against her re-election. But if he stayed silent, he pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the contacts. Bram's number wasn't there, obviously, but his email had been on one of the medical liaison forms Clarice had forged. He opened a blank message, then he stared at the screen. He deleted the draft, then started again. "Dr. Edivane, you don't know me, but I work HOA security. You need to see this." She printed the badge from inside the system. "The hospital alert confirms entry timestamp. If you want the files, I'll leave them in your mailbox. No cameras, no trace." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. He printed the surveillance footage, the badge record, and the gate logs, slid them into a plain manila envelope, drove past 214B at midnight, and left it under the ceramic frog by the mailbox. He didn't sleep that night, didn't open his laptop, didn't go to work the next day. But in the quiet, as the neighborhood sprinklers hissed to life and the sky started bleeding light across the rooftops, Emery Kesslin finally exhaled. He still didn't think of himself as a hero, but maybe he wasn't a coward anymore. They posted the violation at dawn. The notice was taped to our front door in bold red ink, marked Urgent Non-Compliant Event Record. It was signed, of course, by Clarice Mayburn. And it wasn't just a warning this time. It was an official escalation. In accordance with Woodvine Glen Covenant Article 6, Section 12, it read, "Your household has failed to report the occurrence of a transitional life event. This omission constitutes a breach of community harmony protocols. The board requires a formal birth impact declaration within 48 hours, or legal consequences may follow." Legal consequences. I held the paper between my fingers as Vianna slept upstairs, her chest rising slowly against the soft hum of the monitor I'd set beside our bed. Our daughter, just 36 hours old, was swaddled in the bassinet, wrapped in quiet. And this woman, this HOA president, thought she had any claim to it. The phrase that stuck with me wasn't even the threat. It was the line underneath it. Note, this action does not pertain to medical procedure, but rather the event's spiritual imprint on shared land. Spiritual imprint. She was doubling down. I walked out to the mailbox just to breathe, and found something wedged beneath the ceramic frog. Plain manila, no name, no return address. Inside, a printed stack of logs, timestamps, screenshots. The surveillance footage was grainy but clear. Clarice entering the side exit of the delivery wing, wearing a badge that didn't exist. Her name, her face, her hands grazing Viana's IV pole as she approached. The hospital's digital system had flagged. The badge is fraudulent. She hadn't even tried to mask the ID signature. She'd used her own HOA server to generate it. Someone had given me everything, no signature. But I knew. Emery Kesslin, the man who had avoided my eyes for weeks. He'd broken. Quietly, carefully, and just in time. I placed the folder beside the violation notice, laid them both across the kitchen table, and stared at them in silence. I could have gone to the police, but I knew how these things played out in real time. Civil trespass, conditional warnings, slaps on the wrist. They didn't handle spiritual imprint violations with the same urgency as privacy breaches, but hospitals did. I called the director of hospital security at Dominion Regional, Cheryl Coons. I'd known her 10 years. She answered on the second ring. I need to escalate a HIPAA breach, I said, and I need it to go through legal. I have video proof, access log mismatches, and a forged doula license. The person involved is a non-staff HOA official who impersonated care personnel and entered a delivery room during an active labor. There was a pause. Then, send everything. I did, and I knew what that meant. The moment Clarice's name was entered into the hospital's formal breach system, a chain reaction would begin. Internal review, state board escalation, and ultimately, an official filing with the Department of Health. From there, it wouldn't take much for Dominion's legal team to issue a restraining order. That was the strategy now. Let the institutions she tried to weaponize turn back on her. Let her realize she wasn't untouchable. That spiritual jargon and fake bylaws couldn't override federal privacy law. I returned to the kitchen and picked up the Sunleaf medallion. It was tucked into the back of the folder, inside a Ziploc bag marked recovered. No note, just the medallion. Clarice had taken it. That was the moment I stopped being angry. Now, I was focused. This wasn't just about our daughter anymore. Clarice had been tracking families for months, maybe years. Using the HOA as a front for some bizarre control fantasy rooted in spiritual land imprint doctrine. And she'd hidden it inside paperwork, legacy phrasing, fake birth registries. I'd seen this pathology before, in systems, in patients, in bureaucracies that collapse under unchecked belief. This wasn't eccentricity, it was design, and she wasn't going to touch another child again. I didn't sleep the night I filed the breach report. My body was still. My mind wasn't. I kept playing the footage again and again, Clarice in hospital whites, walking into my wife's room with a posture that said entitled, not uncertain. Her eyes didn't scan, she didn't sneak. She floated like she belonged there. It wasn't just criminal, it was practiced. By sunrise, I'd received a reply from Dominion's legal office. The subject line was curt. Subject, formal violation confirmed. D. Clarice. Oh, Mayburn. Inside the message were two attachments. One was a digital certification registry, the other a cross-reference report from the state doula network. Clarice's name didn't appear on either, and the signature on the badge she wore, forged. It matched a pre-printed template from a training pamphlet her niece had once contributed to, back in 2022. She hadn't just trespassed, she'd exploited a dormant access system and used expired familial access to forge a credential. And I knew exactly how to use it. I called Cheryl again. We need a formal chain of custody document for every violation Clarice Mayburn triggered on Dominion property, I said. Not just for internal compliance. I want a state-level inquiry. You're escalating this, she said, not surprised. She touched my wife's IV line, I said. She removed a sacred object from our door, and she submitted a fraudulent credential to our hospital database. If we don't escalate it, she'll do it again. There was no argument. Cheryl understood. The hospital printed the official misconduct report by 10 a.m. I drove back to Woodvine Glen with the document in my glove box. Not for confrontation, not yet. But to be close to the place this all started. Clarice's car was parked crooked at the end of her private drive. her porch still adorned with the same 3 garden gnomes she used to report neighbors for visual disharmony. She was home, probably waiting, probably watching, but I didn't approach her. Instead, I parked 2 blocks over and visited the only place in Woodvine that felt like neutral ground, the chapel bench near the artificial koi pond. That's where I saw Emery. He didn't run, he didn't speak, just nodded like he'd been expecting me. I sat down beside him, the bench creaked, warped by years of sun. "I gave you what I had," he said finally. "I know. That's why this is going to end," I replied. He didn't look at me. "She's done this before. A few years back, she showed up at another birth, just lingered near the front yard after a home delivery, told the family she was there to record the child's aura. They thought she was just eccentric. She's escalating?" "She has been," Emery said. "She calls it legacy monitoring. Says the land can't maintain spiritual symmetry unless she documents who enters and exits the realm. She talked like that in board meetings?" "Only to us. In writing, it's all legalese." I nodded. "That's about to change." I handed him the report. He didn't take it. "I'm not on the board," he said. "I'm just the logs guy." "You're also the one who handed me the proof she snuck into a secure medical facility." "I didn't do it for a thank you," he muttered. "I know," I said quietly, "but someone else will need to explain why an HOA president was able to impersonate hospital staff and get within 3 feet of a sedated patient without a single board member noticing." He looked away again. A single koi splashed in the murky pond behind us. "She's protected," he whispered. "They all owe her something. I'm just the only one too broke to stay loyal." "You're also the only one who hasn't lost his spine." He swallowed hard. His jaw trembled, but he didn't speak. I stood up and looked back toward her house. Quiet, pristine, poison. The report in my hand weighed nothing, but it would land like stone. By Monday morning, I had what I needed. The incident report was certified by Dominion's legal team. The forged badge credentials had been verified through the Department of Health, and Cheryl, true to her word, had submitted a formal HOA breach escalation to the state licensing board. It was real now, bigger than her. Bigger than Woodvine Glen, but Clarice didn't flinch. At 9:42 a.m., she sent another violation. It came as an email this time, not even bothering with the embossed parchment. "Your household has now failed to respond to both birth event documentation and spiritual inspection protocol. This absence of cooperation threatens community cohesion and may result in advisory-level arbitration." Advisory-level arbitration. She made it sound like I'd missed a landscaping review, not stopped her from trespassing into a hospital's sterile wing. I didn't reply. I printed it and added it to the folder. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my lawyer. Her name was Renna Vale. She wasn't a courtroom brawler or media hound. She was quiet, detailed, and ruthless in paperwork. She'd represented me once before, in a malpractice audit that turned out to be baseless. She knew exactly how systems failed when no one was watching. "This is a privacy breach. You already have the legal process started through the hospital, but if you want this to stick permanently, you'll need 2 things. An injunction, and a state-level nuisance claim," she said. "I'm not suing," I replied. "No, but you're warning, and if she retaliates, it becomes a pattern." Renna helped me draft the cease and desist notice. It was crisp, factual, and laced with citations no suburban zealot could dance around. Clarice Mayburn was officially on notice. By Tuesday, the medallion was rehung. Vienna stood with me as I tied it back to the nursery door. She didn't say much. Her hands were still healing from the IV marks. Her stitches were barely sealed, but she watched as I knotted the cord. "Feels like taking something back," she whispered. "It is," I said. But inside, I knew the war wasn't over. At 3:15 p.m., my neighbor, Cynthia Welk, texted me a photo. It was a clipboard, pinned to a community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. The title was handwritten, "Spiritual Witness Accountability Sign-Up, Legacy Realignment for May Births." Below it were lines for signatures. Clarice had turned our daughter's birth into a public registration sheet. I drove there immediately. The bulletin board was still there, still posted. I didn't tear it down. I photographed it, time-stamped it, and filed it in the folder. Then I made a copy and dropped it into Emery's mailbox. If this woman wanted to escalate things into the realm of spiritual surveillance, I'd bury her in the legality she'd ignored. I made one more call to Dominion's compliance officer, not a voicemail, a live answer. Just a heads up, I said. You may receive more than one patient report in the next few days. Our HOA president is recruiting civilians to document newborns for covenant purposes. The silence on the other end was sharp. That's not just breach behavior, the officer said. That's institutional impersonation. If anyone shows up at our maternity ward with those forms, we're flagging the entire HOA. Good. Let them feel that heat. Let them taste what it means to violate sacred space under the illusion of governance. Because this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about sanctity. Clarice had stripped it from the room the night she entered. She thought we'd forget. She thought that because we were quiet, because we didn't scream and stomp and tear things down, we'd just absorb her madness and keep moving. But some of us don't forget. Some of us carry the weight of every stillborn scream we never heard, of every daughter we never held, of every heartbeat we couldn't save. So no, I wasn't done. The lines had been drawn, and Clarice Mayburn had no idea just how surgical I could be when someone tried to cut into my family. The envelope was waiting on my porch. No note, no return address. Just sealed white paper, tucked neatly under the doormat like a relic someone couldn't bring themselves to hand deliver. I brought it inside with the same caution I used handling pathology slides, slow, deliberate, anticipating contamination. Inside were 4 things. A printed copy of the spiritual witness sign-up sheet from the clubhouse, highlighted names, scribbled notes in the margin, a snapshot of Clarice standing outside Dominion Regional's East Wing entrance, date stamped for the night of Vianna's delivery. She wasn't looking at the door, she was looking at the security camera like she knew exactly where it was. A copy of the forged doula badge, blown up, circled, laminated, and finally, a typed letter. Dr. Edivane, you don't know me, but I've been watching this unfold longer than I'd like to admit. I worked in maintenance before they reassigned me to logistics support. Clarice doesn't know I kept access to the credentialing logs. She never changed my level after the board turnover. She's done this before. 3 other families over the last 6 years. She calls it legacy tracking. She makes herself part of your child's origin story. Most people don't notice. She's careful, but not with yours. I'm done protecting her. No. Signature, just the watermark of the HOA office printer visible behind the paper, faint but unmistakable. I didn't need to guess. It wasn't Emery. This was someone else, someone inside, someone with more access than he'd ever had. It was confirmation of what Vianna and I had already started to fear. Clarice didn't act alone. She couldn't have. I scanned the badge again, the name, the credential ID, the expiration date that had been digitally altered to remove the trailing 2022. Everything about it screamed deliberate. So I called Emery. He picked up on the second ring. No greeting. I got a second envelope, I said. There was a long pause. Not from me, he said. I know. It was someone closer, but it lines up. Same badge, same sign-up sheet, same timeline. Another pause. Then, you ready to show it? Yes. There was a shift in his tone, almost relief. I'll be at the next board meeting, he said. I'll talk. You sure? I should have done it 2 years ago. He hung up before I could thank him. It was the first time I'd heard resolve in his voice. That night, I sat down with Vianna. We kept the baby monitor between us, volume turned low, her chest rising and falling on the screen like clockwork. I laid everything out on the table, both envelopes, the photos, the badge, the reports. She's never going to stop, Vianna said. Her voice wasn't fearful anymore. It was tired. Even if you win this, she'll twist something else next time. Another clause, another form. Not if the board votes to remove her. Vianna raised an eyebrow. And you think they will? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the second letter, about the person who sent it, about Emery, about the signs that Clarice wasn't as beloved as she believed. She'd built her empire on silence, on shame, on people being too afraid or too exhausted to fight. But someone had broken that silence. Now there were cracks, and cracks meant pressure points. I think they're tired of covering for her, I said finally. They just need one person to stand up first. And that's going to be you? No, I said, shaking my head. It's going to be Emery. Her eyes softened, just a little. She reached across the table and brushed her fingers against mine. "I just want her gone," she whispered. "She will be." Because I wasn't just bringing accusations. I was bringing evidence. Names, dates, footage, credentials, eyewitnesses, patterns. She'd stepped into a sterile medical facility with a fake badge and a god complex. She'd violated federal privacy law and tried to wrap it in suburban scripture. She thought no one would challenge her, but someone had. And tomorrow, the rest of the board would have no choice but to listen. The HOA board met every second Thursday at 6 p.m., sharp in the community hall next to the tennis courts, an outdated beige building with flickering, overhead lights and folding chairs that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and recycled fear. I arrived 10 minutes early. The board members were already seated, Clarice at the center like a queen behind laminate. She wore white again, a soft knit cardigan draped over her shoulders, and her fingers were folded neatly over a leather-bound agenda book. She didn't glance at me when I walked in, but she saw me. I felt it. Emery was late by 4 minutes. When he entered, his face was drained of all color. No tie. Shirt wrinkled, but his hands were steady, and he carried a narrow blue folder tucked beneath his arm. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Clarice cleared her throat as the final gavel tapped. This session will be limited to 30 minutes. Topic of discussion: non-compliant transitional event reporting and associated community disruptions. She said it without irony, without shame. I waited until they reached the second bullet point: spiritual realignment protocols for spring births, before I stood. I have a HIPAA breach report filed with Dominion Regional and a formal notification submitted to the Department of Health regarding Clarice Mayburn's impersonation of certified medical personnel. That stopped everything. Clarice didn't move. The board members turned in slow motion, 5 heads swiveling as if someone had fired a starter pistol. Board treasurer Lauren Hadley blinked behind his glasses. "I'm sorry." "A what?" I stepped forward and placed the file on the table. This contains time-stamped hospital footage, internal access logs, badge signature comparisons, and a notarized report of trespass during active labor. Clarice opened her mouth, but I cut her off. Clarice entered a sterile labor suite posing as a doula using a forged credential. She removed a religious medallion from our hospital door, interfered with my wife's IV line, and initiated what Dominion Security logged as a Class 2 medical breach. "You're lying," Clarice said finally, her voice low, almost conversational. "I'm the Chief of Obstetrics at Dominion," I replied. "And your badge didn't ping because it wasn't real. You didn't fool a system. You committed a felony in front of a fetal monitor." Silence again. Then Emery stepped forward. He didn't look at Clarice. Not once. He addressed the board directly. "I was instructed to provide Clarice with entry logs and gate timestamps for House 242B. She claimed it was for liability filing. She also used the HOA credential system to replicate an expired hospital template from her niece's internship. The badge used to enter Dominion was printed on HOA equipment under her credentials. I have the metadata." He placed his folder on the table beside mine. Clarice stood. "This is character assassination. This man has had a personal grudge against me since I denied his landscaping variance." "No," Emery said. "I have a problem with people who use the HOA to stalk families giving birth." She turned to the rest of the board, searching for something: support, doubt, distraction. But they were silent. Even Lauren's hands had stopped shuffling papers. "I have the right to observe transitional events," she said. "No," I replied. "You don't. Not legally, not ethically, not under your own charter. This isn't legacy documentation. It's obsession." Clarice took a step back, and that's when I saw it, the smallest shift. Not fear, not guilt, rage, a quiet, boiling sort of rage. "I acted in the community's interest." "No," I said. "You acted in your own mythology. And now you'll answer for it." I turned to the board. "Your president is under investigation by the Department of Health. The hospital has filed charges. The breach is official. If you continue to protect her, you become complicit. And if she sets foot on my property again, I will treat it as trespass with intent to interfere in a protected medical matter." Lauren swallowed hard. Another member, Janice Booth, leaned forward. "We'll review the material and schedule a vote for interim removal." Clarice didn't sit down. She didn't argue again. She simply walked out, her heels echoing across linoleum like a verdict already handed down. The vote was scheduled for 1 week later. 7 days to decide whether Clarice Mayburn would be suspended as president of the Woodvine Glen HOA, pending investigation. 7 days for the board to review the evidence, interview involved parties, and, if they had the spine, remove the woman who believed she could legislate the spiritual imprint of childbirth. I didn't wait. Those 7 days became my war room. I converted my garage into a cold operations space. Whiteboards, folders, printed documentation, duplicate USB drives. I wasn't just preparing to win a vote. I was building something unshakable. I wanted no gaps, no doubts, no Clarice-friendly narrative to squirm her way back in. Every item was logged, ordered, and cross-referenced. The hospital's footage had already been filed with Dominion's legal team and forwarded to the Department of Health. The security badge had been scanned and certified as counterfeit. I had emails from Cheryl Coons confirming that Clarice was not and had never been registered in any doula capacity in the state's medical system. But it wasn't enough. She had roots here, decades of political favors, quiet alliances, people she'd helped with fence permits and landscaping exceptions, and discreet enforcement pauses. The kind of favors that didn't show up on paper. So I focused on her pattern. That's where I could break her. Because Clarice Mayburn had made a mistake. She didn't just target us, she targeted others. And she left trails. I pulled every public HOA report from the last 10 years. Meeting minutes, family announcements, community notices for new births. There were more. Then I expected at least 13 notices involving unreported transitional events since 2015. Only 5 ever escalated into formal violation letters, and 3 of those were signed by Clarice personally. One name I recognized, the Delaney's, 2 streets over. Their home birth last year had been quiet, private, but Clarice had issued a violation anyway, citing failure to announce spiritual disturbance. I remembered it because the husband, Reese, had showed up to a board meeting with a copy of his wife's midwife permit and a scowl that could cut steel. I called him. Reese picked up after the second ring, already wary. "Yeah? This is Dr. Bram Edavane. I live on Ridgemont. My wife just gave birth." A pause, then, "So she got you too?" She broke into the hospital. The silence on the other end was longer this time. Not surprise, just exhaustion. "She stood outside our window during the delivery," Reese finally said. "Didn't even blink when we asked her to leave. Said she was just bearing witness for the soil. My wife filed a complaint. Nothing ever came of it. Would you give a statement? I'll do you one better," he said. "I've got video." He sent it 15 minutes later. Clarice, arms folded, standing 3 feet from the bedroom window, watching the midwife enter. She wasn't hidden. She was posted there like a sentry. When Reese came out and asked her what she was doing, she smiled and said, "Legacy always requires documentation." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was damning. She'd done it before. She'd made a pattern out of proximity, enough to lose the benefit of the doubt. I logged the footage, filed it, highlighted the transcript, called 2 other families from the older reports. One didn't want to be involved. The other said Clarice had taken notes from the sidewalk during their welcome home, gathering for their newborn daughter, and asked to photograph the child for lineage record keeping. I compiled it all, dates, names, footage, language, and on the last night before the vote, I handed copies to every board member myself. No surprises, no digital links, paper, tangible, final. I looked each of them in the eye as I passed them the folder. "I'm not asking for favors," I said, "just a decision you can live with." And then I went home. Vienna was already asleep, our daughter curled against her chest like a promise. I sat in the nursery, medallion swaying gently against the doorframe, and waited. Not to see if they'd do the right thing, but to see if they'd finally stop being afraid. The meeting was standing room only. People came who hadn't attended an HOA session in years. Families with strollers, couples still in scrubs from long shifts, older residents who had been silently compliant for decades. Clarice's name wasn't just a line item anymore. It was a whisper that had grown teeth. The chairs were arranged in a wide semicircle. At the center, the board. Emery sat off to one side, pale but upright, a folder resting in his lap like a shield. Across from him sat Clarice. She wore blue this time, no cardigan, no clipboard. Her hands were folded, but not still. Her fingers drummed a faint rhythm on the armrest of her chair, knuckles twitching with a pulse that didn't reach her face. She was blank. expressionless but alert. I didn't speak first. That was the board's job. Lauren Hadley cleared his throat into the mic. This meeting has been called to determine whether President Mayburn's role will be suspended, pending investigation into multiple violations of medical privacy and procedural misconduct. We've reviewed documentation provided by Dr. Edivane, the Dominion Regional Legal Office, and 2 residents with corroborating statements. He paused. Clarice stared straight ahead. Before we move to a vote, Lauren said, Dr. Edivane has requested the floor. I stepped forward with the folder. No slides, no video, just my voice. I'm not here for vengeance, I said. I'm here for boundaries. I held up a single page. This is a confirmed report from Dominion's Internal Compliance Department, verifying that Clarice Mayburn entered a restricted medical floor using a forged doula credential and remained in proximity to an active delivery without consent, clearance, or purpose. A murmur rippled across the room. Here's a statement from Reese Delaney, including video footage, showing the same individual standing outside his home during a private birth, unsolicited and unmoved. Another pause. A few gasps. A woman near the back crossed her arms and nodded, jaw tight. These aren't one-offs. They're a pattern. Clarice has repeatedly inserted herself into the most intimate moments of families under the guise of spiritual continuity or legacy tracking. But none of that is in the bylaws. None of it is in the charter. I placed the folder on the table. She's not preserving order. She's manufacturing authority. Then I turned to the board. You can look away and call this a misunderstanding, or you can admit that your president used your silence to normalize something that never belonged to her, something sacred. Clarice didn't respond, not with a word, but her posture changed, slightly. That's when Emery stood. I was part of it, he said simply. I gave her access to logs, times, data. I did it because I was scared she'd ruin me if I didn't. I'm not proud of it, but I'm done being part of her theater. He didn't cry, he didn't waver, he just sat back down. Lauren looked at the other board members. Janice Booth raised her hand. I'd like to move to vote. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't shouted, but the moment she said it, a quiet exhale rolled through the room like wind through dry grass. One by one, the board members raised their hands. 5 out of 6. Clarice sat, frozen as the decision was read. Effective immediately, Clarice Mayburn is suspended from all HOA operations, titles, and privileges pending formal investigation by state authorities. The board will appoint an interim president within 7 days. Still, she said nothing. Only when I turned to leave did I hear it, a whisper, low and cracked. They needed me. I didn't turn back. I walked out into the cool night air, past the bulletin board where the witness sign-up sheet had already been torn down, past the koi pond where Emery first broke, past the streetlights that flickered like candles finally burning out. Vienna was waiting in the car, our daughter asleep in the back seat. I got in, closed the door, and finally breathed. The letter arrived 3 days later, typed on official HOA stationery, but this time, Clarice's name wasn't on the masthead. It was signed by Janice Booth, interim president, and it was only 1 page long. Following unanimous board agreement and submission of material evidence to state regulators, the Woodvine Glen HOA has formally withdrawn all spiritual documentation protocols related to birth or family events. A cease and desist has been filed against former President Clarice Mayburn. All previous violations issued under Article 6, Section 12 are void. No further comment will be made at this time. It was over. No parade, no apology, no public shaming. But it was final. Vienna read it 3 times at the kitchen table. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just folded it once and tucked it under the drawer with the birth certificates, right beside the photo of her holding our daughter for the first time. But the neighborhood hadn't settled yet. The board had changed, but the ground still felt like it hummed with leftover tension. People waved more, but their smiles were uncertain. Conversations outside mailboxes were shorter, eyes darting toward empty windows. Because Clarice hadn't moved. Her house was still there, curtains drawn, porch swept, not a single sign that the ground beneath her had cracked. She hadn't attended the last 2 HOA meetings. She hadn't spoken to the press. But she was still inside, still watching. The morning after the board announcement, Emery met me in front of the chapel bench. He looked lighter, less coiled. "I heard she filed a notice with the county," he said. "Says the removal was unlawful, claims she has religious grounds." "Letter? She's saying you provoked it, that this was some personal crusade." I stared out at the pond. The koi had multiplied somehow, tiny flashes of orange moving just beneath the surface. "I didn't do this for revenge," I said. "I did it to keep her from walking into another hospital room like mine." Emery nodded, then handed me a manila envelope. "What's this?" "Everything else, meeting minutes, her memos, private board messages, the stuff that never went public, just in case she tries to come back." I took it and didn't ask how he got it. He stepped away with a quiet wave and didn't look back. The envelope sat in my car for a full day before I opened it. It was worse than I expected. She'd built a system, not just surveillance, but ideology. She called it Legacy Affirmation Doctrine in internal emails. Claimed Woodvine Glen had a spiritual responsibility to maintain lineal equilibrium through observation at moments of generational transition. She didn't think she was invading people. She thought she was preserving them. There were notes about other families, coded language about misaligned rituals, closed-door cycles, births that fractured property harmony. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't about control. It was about belief, and that's what made it dangerous. I burned the envelope in the fire pit behind my house. All of it. I didn't need it anymore. Not legally, not personally. Clarice had been rooted in this place for too long. Let the ash carry her remnants out through the air. 2 days later, the sunleaf medallion fell from the nursery door. The cord had simply worn down. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the smooth, scorched walnut. I tied it again, tighter this time. It didn't make a sound as it swung, but it moved like it remembered what it had survived. Viana walked in behind me. Our daughter slept in her arms, peaceful and soft. "She's safe now," Viana said. "Not just her," I replied. Clarice didn't come to the next vote, or the one after that. Her blinds stayed closed, her mailbox filled with newsletters she never picked up. Eventually, someone new moved in across the street, a couple with a toddler and another on the way. I gave them the only advice they needed. "If anyone ever tells you they need to observe your family for the sake of harmony," I said, "don't open the door." It rained the night Clarice finally left. No one saw her go. No police escort, no moving trucks. Just the echo of tires on wet asphalt and the faint glow of brake lights slipping through the gate at 3 a.m. By sunrise, her porch was bare. No gnomes, no ferns, no flag. The only thing she left behind was a single laminated sheet taped to her mailbox. "The covenant endures." That was all it said. The neighborhood exhaled. For the first time in months, it was quiet. The board released its official notice. Clarice Mayburn permanently banned from holding any leadership or advisory position within Woodvine Glen or any affiliated community. Dominion's legal team confirmed her HIPAA violation had moved to state review. Even the county zoning office, of all people, issued a press release about redefining boundaries between private governance and personal sanctity. It should have felt like victory, but what I felt was absence. When people like Clarice finally fall, they don't vanish. They leave an echo of themselves, an ideology suspended in the air, quiet but heavy, the kind that makes people flinch before they trust again. A week later, Viana brought our daughter home from her first checkup. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. The medallion still hung from the nursery door, darkened with water spots from the open window. She brushed her fingers across it, and the faint jingle it made sounded like the smallest heartbeat. "You ever think she believed all of it?" Viana asked. "I think she believed enough of it to make others afraid," I said. "That's usually all it takes." She nodded and looked down at our daughter. "I hope she never learns fear the way we did." "She won't," I said. I meant it. Because the report Clarice filed, the surveillance she used, the fake credentials, all of it had forced a conversation that spread beyond this street. Dominion implemented a new system of medical verification protocols. No outside observer could ever step into a delivery wing again without biometric confirmation. HOA oversight boards across 3 counties adopted explicit bans on domestic spiritual interference clauses. It became a case study in overreach, and our daughter would grow up never knowing that her first breath had almost been stolen by someone else's delusion of authority. The night of Clarice's departure, I walked down to the community pond alone. The bench where Emery had once sat was empty now. He'd resigned after the vote, left a short letter taped to the security trailer. Sometimes doing the right thing just means finally showing up. The pond water shimmered under the streetlights. I could hear frogs, distant thunder, and the faint hum of the world carrying on. I didn't hate Clarice anymore. Hate gives permanence. What she didn't deserve permanence. It deserved to dissolve, to be replaced by something real. When I came back home, Vienna was asleep. The baby monitor glowed softly beside her. I placed the medallion on the nightstand and sat beside the window. The house felt lighter now, unburdened. For the first time since the night of the breach, I closed my eyes without seeing the flash of a counterfeit badge or hearing the cold certainty of her voice. This child is part of the covenant now. Not anymore. She belonged to no covenant, no rule, no covenantal mythology carved into HOA parchment. She belonged to herself, to us, to the world we'd fought to keep intact. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it just exhales. And that was enough. I looked out at the rain one last time, at the street glistening beneath the lamplight, at the community finally resting under silence that didn't hide anything poisonous beneath it. Clarice Mayburn had built her empire on paperwork and fear. It ended with a single phrase typed into a state ledger: access permanently revoked. And in that small bureaucratic sentence, the entire weight of her world collapsed. If you've ever had to protect your family from someone who thought, control was the same thing as care. If you've ever stood between love and intrusion, then you already understand why I did what I did. Share this story if you believe some doors should stay locked, no matter who's holding the key.